Welcome to the Care Right podcast, your go-to resource for all things elder care. Guiding us through this journey is Annalee Kruger, the founder of Care Right Incorporated, and she has been steadfastly supporting families across the United States. Each episode brings you expert insights, innovative strategies, and practical advice, ensuring that you're well equipped to provide the best possible care for your loved ones. Expect to gain valuable knowledge, learn from real-life stories, and get inspired to take action in your own caregiving journey. So buckle up as we dive into an in-depth discussion of elder care planning and together embrace the journey of caring for aging loved ones on the Care Right podcast.
Hey y'all, it's Costa. Today I'm here with my guest, Annalee Kruger, founder and president of Care Right Inc., senior care advisor, author of The Invisible Patient, and working in the long-term care industry with seniors and families for over 30 years. Annalee, like so many of us, your introduction to senior caregiving happened at home. Will you tell us about growing up watching your parents care for your grandparents and how that's shaped your career?
Sure. So I'm 51, and so back when I was growing up in the 70s, we didn't have all these different levels of care for our grandparents. And so if they weren't able to manage at home on their own, they did one of two things. They either moved in with their kids because there wasn't any other option other than a nursing home, and nobody wanted to do that, right? So our whole family actually took care of our grandparents. It wasn't just mom and dad. It was like, as a little girl, I'm helping bathe my grandmother. I'm putting the powder on her, and I'm getting her dressed and putting on her sandals. And, with my grandfather, he didn't need hands-on care, but he needed the socialization because he was I'm a farm kid. So he was riding horses with us. He's feeding the cows and he's on the combine with us, so he just needed the activity and the structure and the companionship of family. So, but I saw just how hard it was to meet their needs, because especially with my grandmother, she was very chronically sick. And so it was just, it was just a lot of work to take care of her. And then shortly after, like a year after my grandmother, who needed the most care, moved in, my oldest sister went missing in college. She became a missing person. And so on the weekends, my dad and my brother would drive to Nebraska to try to find her. And so then my mom and the rest of my siblings would manage the farm and take care of the grandparents. So I saw that how like life just unfolds, like life has its own agenda and we're constantly getting thrown curveballs. And when you're a family caregiver, that dedicates a lot of time and energy, but it also, all these other things in life happen and you can't just like, okay, well, you're on your own, grandma, So I saw how just life happens and we're always thrown curveballs, and we had a family crisis, but we still honored our promise. We were one of the families that made the promise that we'll take care of you. And we did, but it wasn't always easy. So that's what led me into working in social work. And I knew when I was 9 years old, because this was all kind of unfolding when I was 9. And I was like, I know that this is how I want to help families, because we can't possibly be the only family that this is happening to. And boy, was I correct, because now fast forward, we're in the silver tsunami.
One of the things that I talk about often is how we've shifted from this multi-generational family unit where you took care of your parents, that your parents moved in with you. And a lot of cultures still do that. Mm-hmm. But like, as you talk to families and you reference back to your own experiences, what do you think has changed in our society that's prevented people from taking on the responsibility like you and your family did?
A lot has changed in our society. Number one, it seems like, in my opinion,
of course,
when I first started out working in long-term care, I started out as a social worker and admissions coordinator. Then I moved up into executive director roles, into CCRCs, continuing care retirement communities. But part of that job, when I was an employee, so it was a job, part of that job was always to do the tours. the tours were almost always with the adult kids because mom or dad was in the hospital. So there's no way they're coming out to tour, right? And then the hospital will say, here's a list of facilities, go find one by noon tomorrow because we're discharging. Well, it just seems like back in the 90s when I was starting out as a new social worker, families lived down the street from each other, or they lived in the same zip code, or at least in the same time zone. Right. And so there was that kind of family cohesiveness and everybody just pitched in, just like farm kids. We all just pitched in because that was for the greater good of the family. Right. But by the time I left corporate America and started my own company in 2011, families don't live near each other. It's rare that even as a family consultant that we have a family that the nuclear family is all in the same state, like same time zone. So I think what's shifted is just the profile of the typical family. They have to move away because they get married, or they have jobs, they have to follow the job, or maybe their family dynamics were such that they're like, I don't want to stay in my hometown, or I don't want to stay so close to mom and dad. The relationship's not great. So between the economy and then the family relationships, and I say that just because as a family consultant, 92% of my clients come to me in crisis because there's been some terrible thing that has happened, or the family has kind of woke up and realized, oh, dad is more demented than we thought. We need to probably do something. And yes, you do. But also there's just so much denial, with families thinking that their parents are doing better than they are. And so when you layer on all those kind of opinions or perspectives with adult children about their parents, then there's those relationship rifts as well. And it seems like, in my opinion, when families started moving away from each other, if they didn't invest the time, the effort, the energy, and the resources in maintaining those relationships with each other as siblings and with parents, then when there's that medical crisis, dad falls and breaks his hip, or mom dies unexpectedly and she's the caregiver to dad, then they have to get reacquainted as siblings and as a family. The other contributing factor is employers, in my opinion, aren't as family, the culture isn't as family oriented as it used to be. Like when my dad was working and we were all taking care of his dad, my grandfather, his boss would say, take whatever time you need, family comes first. You don't hear that anymore.
Oh, yeah.
So, and your colleagues are like, well, if you're going to be gone for another 2 weeks because you have to fly to Arizona because dad fell again, even colleagues are saying, look, I can't keep carrying your weight for you when you're gone. So those are, in my opinion, just the shift that I've seen. And then just, employees only get 2 to 4 weeks of vacation, and they're certainly not going to spend every PTO day checking in on aging parents. And then you've got blended families, or, dad lives in Tucson, but mom lives in Fort Myers. And, there's only so many vacation days that you get.
And it's interesting because everything that you've said has come up in a lot of the episodes that we've talked to people who have acted as primary caregivers who have since transitioned to whether it's building their own company or helping other families or managing a support group online. That's exactly what they talk about. It's about putting their life on hold. It's about moving across the country. It's about having to essentially change the direction of their lives to be closer to an assisted living facility that their parents are living in. And, it always brings up in my mind how many families aren't doing that, and they have to rely on the long-term care system, which is generally compartmentalized.
Right.
So, whether you're a spouse or a family member, child, whatever it might be, and you're caring for an individual day in and day out, burnout is obviously going to happen. And today's episode revolves heavily around the concept of compassion fatigue, or the burnout that caregivers experience due to the chronic self-sacrifice.
Yeah.
How does this normally manifest for caregivers, and what should we be on the lookout for?
Sure. So let's back up a bit first.
Okay.
So, because I do a lot of speaking. I did 3 of them yesterday. They were live webinars, and there were total for the day, probably 450 people on
Oh, wow.
total webinars, right? And so they converted it into podcasts. But anyway, I always ask, how many of you are family caregivers right out of the gate? And you might get like a few hands like, oh yeah, I'm a care. But then as I talk about what a caregiver actually is, and then I ask again, then like all these hands like shoot up and they're like, oh my
Right.
gosh, I am doing all of that. That's a caregiver. I just thought I was helping. So let's talk about what a family caregiver is. And I'm sure that your listeners will be like, oh gosh, that is me. And I need to figure out what a plan looks like so that I don't get burned out. Because it is preventable. Caregiver burnout is preventable if we have enough supports in place, if we're educated about what the disease is that our loved one has, and we have an actual aging plan, which is what we do at CareRight. We do aging planning. So caregiving is tasks that you do and time that you're spending on your aging loved one or the person that you're the care recipient. It's not always aging loved ones because we do special needs planning as well. But it's tasks that you're spending time unpaid doing. So it could be, going to go pick up the mail because mom's driveway is too steep and you don't want her to tumble down, right? So it could be going to pick up the mail. It could be, well, mom needs groceries, so I have to go to the store, so I might as well pick hers up. Could be doing laundry, housekeeping, setting up medications, coordinating doctor's appointments and therapy appointments, taking time off work to drive them to their doctor's appointments because you can't trust that mom is going to relay the messages back to you about what transpired during that doctor's appointment. It's calling insurance companies, it's going to the bank, it's paying bills, it's talking to the financial planner, it's talking to the estate attorney, it's signing documents, it's managing their money, making sure that their bills are getting paid. So all of those things
It sounds like a full-time job.
and then you got, now mom needs help in the bathroom and bathing and dressing and grooming, and mom's got dementia. So if I'm not there in the afternoon, she's likely to wander out, So it's all of those things. And I talk about the caregiver snowball. It sounds like as kids, we just think we're all these heroes, right? Like we're like, yeah, we got this. We can do this. And it starts out feeling manageable. And then in time, whatever happens, but in time, dementia progresses, dad has another fall, they move in with you and you don't like their cat. And you're like, oh my gosh, what have we done? I'm so not joking about that. Cats have been a big relationship breaker.
Pets in general
have been a big relationship breaker in my line of work.
I have had certain individuals who are in complete crisis. I mean, they know they are living in unsafe conditions, and we have a no pets policy because a lot of times it'll just end up the caregiver will end up spending more time taking care of the pet than the individual at times, of course.
Yeah.
And people will forego the service.
So they will.
And remain in their environment because of their pet. And it's, I mean, I don't know how they think. I'm not inside their minds, and maybe they consider it like children. So I totally get it.
Yeah.
And cats are a big one.
Cats are a big one only because they climb on counters and anyway. Sure. So yeah, pets can be a challenge, but anyway, so caregiving starts out feeling manageable until it's not. Until you're like, oh my gosh, now I'm spending 10 hours a week. Now I'm spending 20 hours a week. And now I'm spending, all this money out of pocket. So for example, my CareRight clients, I ask them, how much money are you spending out of pocket? Just because again, families are darting across the country every time mom falls. So it's not like they're always just right down the block from mom. And so my typical family is spending $15,000 in airfare alone the year prior to engaging with us on a comprehensive aging plan. Because when dad lives in Arizona and you live in New York and he falls again and you get that crisis call, airfare is not $69 on Allegiant. It's like $1,000 at a pop.
Right.
And they tend to, sometimes they tend to get a one-way ticket because they're like, I don't know how long I'm going to be gone this time, and then spouses, their spouses like, look, the first couple $3,000 was one thing, but now it's like 10, 15 grand a year. Like this isn't sustainable for us. So we talk about the financial toll of family caregiving as well. And so that's why, unfortunately, by the time families come to us to talk about an aging plan, their relationships are really burned out at home, because the spouse is like, you're not even emotionally present for us and your own family anymore. And they're like, I love your parents, but you got to figure this stuff out. They're stressed out because of their employers and colleagues saying, look, we got to have you here, dude. Like, if you're not selling and meeting your sales quota, you're not going to have a job. So there's all this like other stressors in it that trickle because of family caregiving, and family caregiving can derail your relationships, your emotional well-being, your physical well-being, your safety, and your finances all across the board. And so we want to educate family caregivers that aging and caregiving can be a positive experience when you have an aging plan. We spend our whole life planning for all these other things. I want to go to this college, so I need to do these classes, get these grades, do this type of volunteer work to be able to get into this college. I want to do this as an occupation. This is the type of college I need to go to, and this is what I need to do that. This is the other training and certificates. If you want to go on vacations, people spend 20 hours just planning a vacation. But so why would we leave our most dependent, vulnerable population? Why would we be willy-nilly about that when they become so at the mercy of healthcare workers and family to take care of them? That's why families fail, and they fall through the cracks, because the healthcare system will say, oh, you have Parkinson's, good luck to you. And then that's kind of it, and that's why
Take these meds.
That's why Care Right fills the gap. A few weeks ago,
Yeah.
I was working with a new family, and their mom had Parkinson's for 5 years. She's had that diagnosis for 5 years. And when the daughter called me, because she's like, God, mom's falling all the time, and she goes, I just can't do this anymore. I hurt my back trying to pick her up the last time. And I said, well, so I laid out what Parkinson's really means, and falls are a hallmark of that disease, and it can be a dementing illness. So I walked her through, well, is your mom, I have a memory impairment checklist, and she's like, yeah, she's doing all of that stuff. And 5 years of that diagnosis in the family, family had no idea. So shame on the healthcare industry for allowing these families to fall through the cracks. But that's why we talk about, with the aging plan, we have to educate our families that we're working with, because they don't know. Or they'll say, if dad's dementia progresses, so that tells me that no one's really done their homework, right? And so that's why with our clients, it's so much almost curriculum based, because they're coming to us so naive and misinformed. They'll say Medicare and Medicaid in the same sentence as if it's the same program. They'll say, if dad's dementia progresses. They'll say assisted living and nursing home in the same sentence as if it's the same type of care, and it's not at all. So we have to really start at ground zero and just really educate them about aging and dementia and caregiving.
And to prevent that burnout, the best solution, in your opinion, is to have an aging plan and to start doing education and research. So as we're talking, it's bringing up a few things to mind, because from the healthcare industry perspective, they're not doing a good job of educating individuals. But more importantly, when you're talking about preparation, whether it's college or a career, how many people prepare for retirement?
Wow.
And estate planners and retirement experts. I just had a conversation last week with somebody who's a very prominent estate planner in our community, and he doesn't even recognize the necessity for having a conversation for long-term care, nor preparing for it. And his rebuttal, and I want to hear what you have to say about this, is that they don't need estate planning because they have the financial means to be able to afford long-term care, and they'll be just fine. I know. That's what I thought. I was like, okay. Okay. And his client base is getting older and older.
That's
He may not have, they may be in their late 50s, early 60s. They're not quite there where they need this hands-on and wraparound services. But when you talk to people, you say 92% of your individuals come to you in crisis, which means that they've spent a substantial amount of money and they've also reached the end of their rope. They may very well be at that burnout stage.
They are at that burnout stage.
And when you see all of the people that are supposed to help them along the way sort of drop the ball over and over and over again, I mean, how, specifically speaking to estate planner and retirement experts, I'm curious your thoughts as to why they don't have a more thoughtful conversation about planning for long-term care.
So that is an entirely other podcast, because I have a whole lot of stuff I have to say about that, but I'll just give you a breakdown of a couple of things.
Okay.
All right. So I truly believe that if we want to be successful in life for anything, we have to put a plan together. You can't be willy-nilly about everything in life. There's some people who skate through life doing that, and that's cool if it works out for you, but it usually does not. When we're talking about, because I built a whole nother company, I have CareRight, but I also have Plan for Life because of the financial planning industry ignoring the needs of their clients, not addressing caregiving and the impact of caregiving on the financial portfolio and assets under management, not using that collaborative approach and referring them to attorneys to make sure that they have their living wills, power of attorney, all that stuff buttoned up, because all of those things, litigation and premature hospitalizations, all affect premature facility placement, all impacts negatively the assets under management, the portfolio. Elder planning attorneys, they fall into that same clump, I just can't believe an elder law attorney doesn't see the value in proactive planning. And here's when we say estate planning, we're talking about living wills and power of attorney, and the HIPAA documents are included in that. Right? We're not just talking trusts and stuff like that. So just so that your listeners are educated on what that means. So when we're talking about a family who doesn't have, let me give you an example. Recently, I worked with a family that I talked to them about 7 months ago for their 30-minute consult to see if they wanted to work together to put a plan in place. I said, you're already in crisis. They had their mom on Zoom. She's in her 80s. She looked exhausted already. She's been taking care of the dad with dementia. He's wandering. He's got his days and nights mixed up, all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, we have to safeguard your mom because we know that the primary caregiver over age 60 has a 65% mortality rate. Fast forward 7 months. They didn't want to engage in services because it costs money. I was like, pay now or pay later. So they call on a Saturday morning at 7 a.m. And here's where this is important, because no one calls me at 7 a.m. on a Saturday with good news.
Of course.
So what happened is the 4 kids live in 4 different states. Parents live in a totally different state. And so the kids are like, hey, I tried to get a hold of mom all week. Have you gotten a hold of her? No. So the closest daughter lives a 6-hour drive away. So she hops in the car and drives, and lo and behold, she knocks on the door of mom and dad's house. Dad opens the door. He doesn't recognize her because he's that progressed with dementia. And she's like, oh my gosh, what is going on? So first of all, she's hit with, dad doesn't recognize me, because she's like, oh, when did that start happening? And she looks around, the place is trashed, BM everywhere, all over the furniture. Mom is dead on the kitchen floor.
Oh, God.
But dad is too demented to call 911. He doesn't know how to use the phone. Mom was the primary caregiver. She made sure he ate properly, had his meds, was bathed, dressed, groomed, toileted, clean. Mom's dead on the kitchen floor for a period of time, right? And so this daughter who's like, first she gets hit by dad not knowing who she is, the place is trashed, mom's dead on the kitchen floor. So here's why estate planning is important, because then of course now they see the value of working with us, right? But now we're doing crisis planning, which is a different rate because now it's also Saturday. And so here's why estate planning is important. So I'm asking them, and of course, this is why I try to get families to plan ahead, because then we have the luxury of time and emotions aren't so heavy. So now I'm working with this family, And I'm like, okay, what? Because dad obviously can't stay home by himself. Does he have a living will, a power of attorney, and HIPAA documents? No, I can't. I don't know where any of that stuff is. We've never talked about this kind of stuff. So obviously, dad is not decisional. So now they have in their state, the attorney quoted them that it was going to be like 18,000 to get emergency guardianship because they didn't have their estate documents in order. And I'm like, okay, who are your parents' financial planner? I don't know. We've never met this person. We've never talked to them. We don't know where their accounts are because mom and dad took care of all of that, or mom took care of all of that. And so as the daughter is in the house and waiting for the funeral home to the mortician to come get mom and all that kind of stuff, she's looking around and there's like stacks of mail piled up because mom was so overwhelmed with taking care of dad. She's exhausted.
Sure.
There's only so much energy that we have. It's a finite
Right.
amount especially when you're 80s. And so then the daughter's like, oh my God, we had no idea that she wasn't taking care of the bills and wasn't taking care of any of this type of stuff. So that's a long story of what a typical crisis can be. But now the family's got our crisis rates that they're paying to fix this problem.
Mm-hmm.
And now they've got the $18,000 emergency guardianship paperwork to get done, and the fee that they're like, how are we supposed to pay for that? They've got the cost of the funeral because parents didn't plan ahead with a funeral either. So that, they're looking at 35, 40 grand just like within a few days. Right.
And
so that's why it's so important.
But to solve the problems of having so many different siblings and kids living in so many different states and being confronted with this, with aging essentially of your parents,
Mm-hmm.
the best solution is to create that aging plan. But more importantly, like, when should they start creating it? When their parents are 50, 60? When is it too early? When is it too late?
It's never too
When
early.
should they?
And
Okay.
It's never too early in my opinion. And this is why, because every single family needs an aging plan. I'm 50 years old, but when I was 40, because I'm also an international speaker on all of these types of topics, right? So I just made it through Shenzhen and Beijing, China. God, I don't know how I made it through, but I managed, thank God.
Congratulations.
Yeah, that is on Annalie's list of accomplishments in her life. But then I come back to Sheboygan, Wisconsin, because I had built CareRight in Milwaukee, and I had a cluster of clients in Sheboygan, so I was just going to have a Sheboygan week. Long story short, I'm walking up the street on the main street in Sheboygan. I encounter this cute little older guy. He's in his 80s. I can't help myself. I love elderly people. They're my people. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, hi, how are you? And I know when you ask an elderly person that, you're going to get a whole laundry list of their diagnoses and how constipated they are. And I'm cool with that because I know my people. So he's telling me all about his health issues, and we get to the intersection and we get the little green light that says we can go. So we walk across. He's still telling me about his heart stents that he had put in 6 months prior. All of a sudden he yells, watch out. The next thing I know, I'm getting up off the street. I, at the time, had a yellow leather backpack as a purse, and I carry way too much crap with me, but it saved my life because this school bus driver was distracted by the kids on the bus. And instead of looking through the windshield at the Four Corners stop, she was looking up in that mirror because there were kids fighting. And so she blew through the Four Corners stop. She did not apply the brakes until she saw my face break the headlight of the school bus. I flew 15 feet and got up. I'm a farm kid. I'm 5'10", thank God. I'm not a frail little lily flower.
You got hit by a school bus.
Yeah, the bus, the headlight, that's what all these scars are right here. So anyway, she was distracted. And so my point in saying when is the time? The time is now, because I certainly did not wake up 3 days after my 40th birthday on May 3rd of 2012 thinking, I think I'm going to get hit by a school bus and have my whole business derailed, my health derailed, and honestly, my finances derailed because not working for a year kind of sucked.
Yeah.
And
sure.
So my point is life, I've said this twice now on this podcast, life has its own agenda. We have to be prepared. We have to get through that layer of denial of nothing's going to happen to me. Nothing's going to happen to my parents or our elderly parents have to get through that denial and stop saying, well, of course I'm going to die at home and we don't need to talk about any of this kind of stuff because none of that's going to happen to me. But yet thousands of people had major strokes last Thursday and they didn't wake up thinking, oh, I'm going to have a devastating stroke that's going to land me in a nursing home at 16 grand a month. Now do they?
So as I'm doing this presentation, and I do it often, and I do it to a wide array of audiences, and it's primarily around long-term care strategies and estate planning to try and avoid having to essentially divest all your generational wealth to qualify for Medicaid.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't ever paint a rosy picture. I explain the increase in demand as people start to age. I try to lay out as many statistics about people who are retiring. Only 60 to 70% of them are going to retire on Social Security income alone.
Mm-hmm.
And, I try to make it as bleak as possible to try to get people into action. So I have a friend of mine. This was in the same meeting where the financial planner was talking. Friend of mine, good friend. He, is very fiscally responsible, works for a bank. He's in his late 30s, early 40s. His dad's in his 60s. And I could tell like the blood is leaving his face as as we're talking. And he says, I'm going to go and call my dad right now and tell him that we need to start working on these things.
Mm-hmm.
And then within 2 hours, he texts me and he says, hey, I talked to my dad and they said they're going to self-fund. That's all he said. And so after this episode is out, I'm going to send it to him so that he understands that it's a lot more than just, yeah, sorry, son, I'm going to self-fund. Have a nice day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people don't understand until it's too late.
They don't understand until it's too late. And I just want to say too, this estate attorney thing is like really kind of,
That's okay. I know I hit a hot button. I'm good with it.
Thorn in my side. And
Yeah.
why? Because I've been in the long-term care space working with families and seniors and very sick, frail people for over 30 years. Because I was a candy striper in nursing homes. I mean, I literally lived in nursing homes for the bulk of my life, working in them and volunteering in them. So I have spent plenty of time in nursing homes and ICU units to know what quality of life means to me. Now, that is such a personal, like when you think about quality of life, what does that really mean? And I had to rethink it when COVID hit too, because I have like 2 pages of an addendum in my healthcare power of attorney documents, because in case I can't ever communicate, because I work with dementia patients, traumatic brain injury people, they can't communicate. They went from one day being able to communicate to, a motorcycle accident with a traumatic brain injury to not being able to communicate at all. So like I have 2 pages of an addendum of instructions for my healthcare power of attorney that I have walked through with my brother and my sister, because I don't have kids. They're my siblings are my direct decision makers. But I don't want a feeding tube. I don't want to be poked and prodded at all. And so when I had my bus accident, I carry, because I do crisis, I have like my own trauma from like families who choose not to plan ahead. So I carry my living will, my power of attorney, and my HIPAA document because I travel a lot. And God forbid something happened to me. Like I did not wake up that morning thinking I'm going to get hit by a school bus, but thank God I carry those documents with me in my bag, in my purse, and in my car, because I don't want to be one of those people that ends up with a feeding tube and a trach and then relying on an $11 an hour employee to suction me because I can't suction myself, and then drown in my own saliva.
Yep.
You talk about painting an ugly picture. That's real. That's real.
It is. And
so,
it's in every single state, all 50 of them, and the territories.
And so oh my gosh, this attorney is like, ugh. Because here's the thing, if you don't have these documents in order, and God forbid, your dad has a stroke, and now it's like, okay, who's going to make sure the bills, who's going to take care of the financial stuff, right? Like who's going to make sure that the bills still get paid? Because that generation doesn't do a lot of auto pay. They still cut checks. Right. And so it's not like you can be in Ohio and dad and mom and California and like manage unless you happen to have their checkbook, you got to like shift everything online and stuff, so my point is that too many times, because I work with families in crisis and most of them don't have any of this stuff in place. And so they're like, well, how am I supposed to be the financial power of attorney when I don't have any idea who the financial planner is? I don't know who the attorney is. I don't know where their accounts, I don't have any of their passwords. I don't know what they have for long-term care insurance, if they have insurance and all, if they have multiple properties, because a lot of my clients have multiple properties across the country. They're like, I have no idea where these properties are. If they're landlords, they have no idea who to contact for property management. So if you want your kids, I don't know the audience here, but if you want your kids to be successful as a power of attorney, you have to give them the information they need to be successful. Same thing from a healthcare perspective. If you've named a healthcare power of attorney, you have to sit them down and say, these are what my wishes are. This is what I feel strongly about. Like, that's why I have a 2-page addendum of instructions specifically for my power of attorney. And we go over this twice a year because I travel a lot. And that way, and I'm doing them a favor, and they know that, because the worst thing families do, like families make tons of mistakes because they don't know what they don't know. And so the worst thing to do is not have documents at all in place. Number 2, have them in place, but then never tell your family that you have them and what your wishes are, and not giving them a copy of the power of attorney, because otherwise they have to have it in their fingertips because they're going to have to produce it.
Let's say that a family did all the right things. They got they have the aging plan in place. They've saved for retirement. They have, the income to be able to support themselves in long-term care. Let's just say they even got long-term care insurance, okay, which is only 7% of the
Yeah, I
US
was going to say that
population.
would be a unicorn client.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Let's say they got it all. At the end of the day, though, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I mean, obviously there is a level of morality attached to this question, but I'm just curious, how do you set the correct boundaries? So caregiving is a full-time job. Whether you have a plan or not, you're still going to be engaged. Let's just say it's a part-time job. It's 20 hours a week. That's still 20 hours a week. Most people in America have to work 40, even 60 hours a week. You
Right.
also have a family that you have to attend to. How do you set those boundaries in caregiving without feeling guilty?
That's a loaded question. So when we work with our clients, because we're facilitating the family meeting and saying what's working well, what's not working well, and our clients, the whole family, right? So everybody gets a say because it's affecting everybody in one way or another. Even the brother who's not involved, it's still affecting him in one way or another, because it's going to affect the whole family. So when we work with our clients, we're like, well, what do you want to take off your caregiver plate? Because I find out from each person who's doing what, like, what is your role? Who's doing what? How much time are you spending? Because families aren't talking about this. And so then the siblings who are like, oh, daughter Sally, you're always over exaggerating how much time mom takes. Well, so you know what? Fine. Keep a time tracker, keep a log. And that way, you can say, well, I had to take 4 days off work this month because mom had 4 doctor's appointments and da-da-da. And so we need to look at, okay, if there's funds there, if there's resources there to pay for outside help, we need to take off the most pressing, difficult, frustrating, resentment causing tasks. So care coordination is an example, because you have to make all these calls to doctor's appointments and the VA during normal business hours. Well, if you work a 9-to-5 job, which there really isn't anything like that anymore, it's like a 12-hour day job,
Right. Yeah.
You can't just step away for 2 hours because you're on hold with a VA for an hour and a half trying to get a hold of somebody. Or if you have to, the doctor changed mom's prescription and you have to be on the hold with CVS for an hour, you just can't do that. So, and keep your job and keep your sanity and keep your relationships. And so that's why we're like, what do you want to take off your caregiver plate? Because then we can do your care coordination, because we're virtual. So we do virtual care coordination for families all across the country, because that way you need to think about, how do you want to spend your energy? Because that is a finite asset that we have. How do you want to spend your time? And how do you want that relationship to be these last years with your elderly parents? Would you rather be resentful and angry because you have to take another day off work or miss another vacation, or have your husband on your butt because he's like, oh, we can't travel to Rome because your dad is having surgery,
Right.
And so we outsource that. We're like, okay, you've got money to pay for this. This is how much it's going to be. A home care companion in your area is going to cost this much. A geriatric care manager, our advocacy services, to be the project manager, basically, so that you can just be the son and the daughter. But yeah, it's going to cost money. So
when it comes to self-care, though, as we're pivoting through this conversation, I want to hear more about kind of what you think self-care means to a caregiver, and more importantly, maybe some actionable tips that caregivers can incorporate into their routine to ensure that they're taking care of their own needs.
I actually ask, because we can't be so audacious to assume that we think that we all know what self-care is for someone else. That's a
It's a good
bold
point.
assumption. I know what self-care is for me. And so self-care for me is, I want time alone. I need to recharge. It's reading, it's listening to music, it's listening to podcasts. So I ask each person, what does self-care mean to you? Because I do a caregiver burnout assessment with my clients, and they are all in the severe burden range. So I'm like, because they're coming to me in crisis.
How many clients do you see annually?
Oh, and so we usually have about 125 clients per month on different services that we offer
Amazing.
across the country, and then a whole bunch in the UK, because they can't just hop on a plane every time dad falls.
Yeah.
you know,
And I mean, and is it fair to assess that you have a fraction of the need in terms of, I mean, you're seeing like you're roughly about 1,500 people a year,
Mhm,
1,500 families a year,
mhm.
and think of how many people are out there that don't even access your services.
And they don't know about it
They
either. And
don't
that's
know about it.
w-
Are there
you'd say
are
that
there
we're the
other
best
companies
at it.
like yourself
No, so
across the
there's
country?
companies that do bits and pieces of what we do, because there's companies that do geriatric care management, but
Hmm.
they're not doing aging planning. They're still it's still crisis mode. So when
Yeah.
we talk about, and then there's these companies that do placement, so they just work off of commission. They only refer people to where they get the kickback, and that's a whole nother thing. I'm not going to go into that. But there's no planning, there's no grab and go binder, there's no patient advocacy. It's just a transaction. It's a one and done.
Hmm.
And if your parent runs out of money and they're in that facility that they got placed at by the placement company, you're on your own. And
Yeah.
or you chose one of the companies that the placement company referred to you, and then you find out, oh my gosh, mom's been abused or neglected, they're not doing anything for her. There's no support there. It's a transaction. It's a one and done. Or they'll move your parent into a different facility so they can get yet another kickback, because that's how that all works. It's not client focused, it's kickback focused.
Yeah.
So anyway, I got off on a little tirade about
Sorry, yeah, I think I took you down a rabbit hole
those are
there.
two hot buttons for me.
Yeah.
Really. Okay, so ask me that question again.
Well, I just love to hear your perspective on self-care. I know that you
Okay,
said it's
yeah.
different for everybody else, but I mean, just I guess some simple things that caregivers can strive for, to say, okay, I'm at least caring for myself in a general standpoint.
So in general, what seems to be across the board, what people are looking for and what they're craving is stuff that they haven't had for weeks or months. They want time alone. They want their care recipient to say thank you. They want to be able to read a book without being called, honey, I need to go to the bathroom. They just want to be able to read a chapter or read a book. They want to be able to unplug from their phone from dad calling at 2 a.m. because he's out of toilet paper. They want that boundary, and they want to be able to schedule a vacation and actually have confidence that they're going to be able to go on that vacation. They want to go get their hair done because they haven't been able to get their hair colored for weeks or months. they want to go to the salon to get their nails done. They want their spouse to say, "Hey, honey, I've got you. I've got you. I've got your back."
Yeah,
Instead of,
absolutely.
you're not performing your spousal obligations because you don't have energy, or you're not present, or you're always looking at the camera to make sure your dad didn't fall when you should be spending time with us. I mean, those are the common themes of families that say, I just want some time alone, or I want someone
Sure.
to say thank you, or say, this is noble that you're doing this. But there's a fine line between being a caregiver and getting burned out. So when you can tell that you're emotionally stressed out, or when your head hits the pillow and you should be sleeping and you're like, oh my gosh, did dad take his meds tonight? When you have that kind of angst and anxiousness about you, you're heading in the wrong direction of being a healthy caregiver. When caregiving has derailed your physical health and you're gaining weight, you're not sleeping, or you want to sleep all the time, or you've got blood pressure issues, or your diabetes is out of control. So when it's derailing your emotional health, your physical health, your finances, because a lot of us caregivers are shelling out a lot of money in airfare or gas, checking in on parents, or I can cover your
I mean,
cell phone.
not to mention the unpaid
That's the
caregiving
thing. And
that's
then
being
there's that whole
provided.
gap of that, and families will say, I took early retirement, not thinking that how much all of this care is going to cost. Because again, families are coming to us at CareRight thinking, oh, Medicare is going to pay for everything. Or they think that their parent can stay home 24/7 until they die on Medicaid. And I'm like, Medicaid doesn't cover that, so
There's so
they're
much
making
education that needs
they're
to be done.
making bad decisions off of wrong information. And that's why when we do aging planning, it's a process, because we have to educate them so they can make smart decisions. And that plan is, that's great if mom and dad want to age in place at home. Here's what that's going to look like, and here's how much that's going to potentially cost. But what's the plan if aging at home doesn't work out, or it's not feasible or safe? We have to do that care matrix so that you understand what care options are available to you based on what you can afford. How long are their waiting lists? What are their state surveys like? We teach our clients how to tour these different care communities. We teach our clients what are the differences in levels of care: independent living, assisted living, memory care, secured memory care versus alarmed memory care. Families don't know that there's two different kinds. They don't know what home health is compared to companion care. So it's really, we have to educate them and teach them how to do those tours of those different care communities proactively to get yourself on the waiting list, so that if or when things change at home, you're not now at the 11th hour trying to find communities that you can move into. That's why I started CareRight in the first place, is because families weren't planning ahead at all. So we got to get everything buttoned up if you want to have the best aging and caregiving journey possible.
Annalee, I want to talk about your book, The Invisible Patient, where you talk about the emotional, physical, and financial toll experienced by family caregivers.
Yeah.
How does this book help empower both caregivers and their loved ones?
Yeah. So it's actually, so when you asked about demand, because there aren't other companies doing what I'm doing. Like I said, there's companies doing bits and pieces. So before my dying day, I want to be able to reach these millions of families all across the world, because it's not just a United States based issue. It's people all across the country are caring for elderly parents, and they're getting burned out because they don't know what they're getting themselves into. So I've literally had thousands of families through the last many years say, God, I just wish that there was like a what to do with mom and dad as they age kind of guidebook. So I wrote one. And so it's thicker than what I expected, or it's longer than what I expected.
It always is.
And my editor was like, we want it to be 99 pages or less. I'm like, fat chance of that. Like, there's a lot of people need to know. But I also wrote it in like they edited it and put it in like 14-point font, because I know my population, they're older. So anyway, It's called the invisible patient because usually when I'm working with clients, I'm the first person that they've dealt with that has actually asked, how are you holding up? Because everyone's always like, oh, how's your dad? Well, dad's fine, but it's killing me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yep.
caregiving is killing me. So the invisible patient is jam packed with scripts on how to facilitate your own family meeting, how to broach these topics with your family, a checklist on your grab and go binder. You know what we have, it's a plug and play solution. It's a grab and go binder that has all of the whole checklist of what you should have in place: accounts, passwords, estate documents,
Absolutely.
insurance, all that kind of stuff. But it's also like how to tour care facilities and like pages and checklists of considerations. What if mom needs one level of care and dad needs another? What if mom's a primary caregiver to dad and he's got dementia and mom dies? So it's a whole resource guide, and it's meant to be read in one of two ways because it's all by chapter. So for families that are in crisis, they tend to flip to the chapter that they need to learn about the most. But other people read it cover to cover. So just so you know, there is some redundancy in it because I don't know the audience if they're going to read cover to cover or use it as a training manual and just read the chapters that they need to know. Plus, I honestly wrote the book literally from like midnight till 4 o'clock in the morning for weeks on end. So I'm sure there's a lot of redundancy in there.
Sure.
So it's a
But
whole,
sometimes it's important to drive the point home, you know?
it really is. And so
Yeah.
my point in writing the book was that way I can offer solutions to families with literally any budget. And the book is $20. If you don't have $20, I can't help you. You have to
Right.
be able to invest in your own outcomes. And the other thing is that like there's agencies out there that you can go to for resources, but the reality is that it just causes more confusion because you can go and pick up brochures and flyers, but then what are you going to do with it? And that's the problem is there's information you can Google, but it's not going to be your specific needs.
And also, you know, when you start talking to an agency, you're automatically going to be spending a lot of money
Yeah.
without even a plan or a general understanding of what to expect.
Yeah.
I mean, there's really no end in sight. And obviously, money is not an infinite property, right?
Right.
Eventually, it goes away. And you know, I'll be honest. Most of the private pay clients, even in a community such as Cookeville, which is a very small town in Tennessee, with a population of about the entire county has only 80,000 people in it. It's between Nashville and Knoxville. Most private pay rates are in the $30 range now. And it's even higher in metro markets.
Oh, sure.
Because if you want a qualified staff member that you can rely on, you're going to have to pay them pretty well, you know? And it's fascinating to me how many people just don't know what they don't know.
They don't know what they don't know.
It is fascinating. I do have 3 questions, and just real quick questions with relatively short answers. You cover, or you can operate within all 50 states, and you can even operate internationally.
Right.
In your opinion, are there any states that are actually doing a good job? I'm just curious because I mean, you have more experience in this in a much more macro standpoint.
So I will say that I was more proud of healthcare and long-term care before the pandemic.
Okay.
The pandemic shed the light, and that when I got my master's degree in 2008, my thesis was the changing landscape of healthcare and long-term care. About we have a shortage coming of family caregivers because families are smaller than they've ever been. So less pool for family caregiving and less pool for professional caregivers. I don't want to totally bash Florida, but when I came from Milwaukee, we have some pretty decent care options in Milwaukee for care facilities. But we also have some bad ones there too. But when I came to Florida, I will admit that I feel like I came to the twilight zone of healthcare because I've never been so angry and frustrated at care facilities and healthcare agencies that should care about their patients and making sure that they are providing quality, properly trained staff.
We always like to end the show with a call to action. After 30 years in the industry, what's your best advice for listeners on how to have a fulfilling and happy life as a caregiver?
Ooh, communication. I would say communicate. And I would say communicate with your family and say, hey, we're having struggles here. We need to work as a team. So because if you communicate properly and effectively, then you can work as a team, as a family. But you have to do it ahead of time. You have to do it before family resentment happens and crisis happens with families. You have to start communicating earlier, so sooner rather than later, and not shy away from difficult conversations about dementia or admitting that you're getting burned out as a caregiver. So that's why I chose communication, because it's broad enough that it's going to add value in every single area of your life.
Thank you for tuning in to the Care Right podcast. We hope today's discussion has provided you with valuable insights. If so, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share our podcast with others who might find it helpful. Remember, Care Right is more than just a podcast. It's a community dedicated to supporting family caregivers with comprehensive care planning, crisis management, and resources for every stage of aging. Stay connected with us for future episodes as we continue to explore essential topics in aging planning, elder care, and financial planning. Until next time, take care, plan wisely, and remember, you're not alone in your caregiving journey.